Okay, it's June 15th, 2020. George Webb here on the Diplomatic Back Channel. What's old is new. A lot of talk about Antifa lately, a lot of talk about Black Lives Matter being infiltrated by Antifa, a lot of people drilling down now, a lot of the analysts drilling down, saying, hey, Antifa is really Act Blue. We've heard about this Act Blue before. We've heard about Act Blue back in 2016. What's the connection here? Well, you probably remember me standing in front of their bank, their headquarters bank, Amalgamated Bank, saying, this guy named Keith Mestrick is the same guy who's the head of the SEIU bank. He's the same guy who's behind the DNC funding. There's this other guy named Andy Tobias that's moving money from the state organizations to the federal or federal to the state, depending on how they want to create disruption. You're going to see that that's going to be the funding mechanism when it's all said and done. Right now, other analysts like Charles Ertel are at the IRS filing level, but what we did 3 years ago now, is look at the actual players inside the DNC that were pulling the strings. That's the key. And we knew their communications network inside the DNC, which was the encrypted BlackBerries. We knew it was Imran Awan. We knew it was Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff, Keith Ellison, now creating his disturbance up in Minneapolis. We've talked about the different people in Seattle, in the state of Washington who were carrying Awan BlackBerries, and we identified all 45 as a part of this covert weapons shipping program or caching program. And people are confused by this weapons caching. They're saying, what's this weapons caching? Don't armies just kind of amass at the border and then march in and then attack? And that is true. That's one form of invasion, which is called a overt attack. What I'm talking about is covert activities. Covert activities allows you to attack your enemy when they don't even know they're being attacked. Doing things that are questionable as far as the source and the hand that caused them, like a whole bunch of windows being smashed as a way of creating terror. Well, is it a bunch of folks that just happen to have bricks that night or crowbars that night to smash 10 blocks of windows? Or was there a hand behind that to create that disruption? And then you just cycle up the disruption when you start introducing weapons and explosives. And that is the subject of a lot of books called Gladio programs. Gladio is the code word that was used in Europe for the CIA creating these weapons caches in Eastern Europe. And the idea was that you'd be able to use these weapons and explosives to create disruption inside the Soviet Union, and then that would eventually fall. There'd be some D-Day, like you can think of D-Day in World War II, where you have a secret message go out and everyone would go to their gun caches and attack simultaneously, and you wouldn't give your enemy any warning. And Sibel Edmonds has talked a lot about Gladio, and then Gladio B, where the same techniques were used by Fethullah Gulen in Turkey, from Turkey, and these radical groups like the PKK, which is a funder of Antifa, to do this sort of covert warfare where you cache the weapons, you do secret training missions, and then all of a sudden you spring a whole psychological and political psychological campaign at the same time you're sort of calling your warriors. This is known as a color revolution. We talked a lot about it on our channel. William Engdahl. We talked a lot about organizations which have done this in coordination with NATO, a company called OTPOR, O-T-P-O-R, based in Sarajevo. We've talked about Antifa just being a black revolution, the black being the color of the revolution here in the United States. We've talked about the weapons caching, the front companies or front religious organizations that were used to cache the weapons, like Keith Ellison's cache near Minneapolis, like the cache in Indiana with Andre Carson being, again, an Awan BlackBerry holder, Muslim Brotherhood holder at the Islamic Society of North America. We went to Fethullah Gulen's organization in Saylorsburg, spent 2 days there watching material being moved in and out, both at night and during the day, large, heavy military. So we went to some of these caching sites. We've talked about programs and warfare when these caching caches are moved to operationalize for covert war in Libya and Syria. We've looked at the generals that are involved, General Grange, his wife Cindy Grange, the port of Norfolk. We've gone to different ports like the port of Canaveral where there's long-term deals with the UAE for this sort of weapons caching. We've talked about weapons for drugs deals like Iran-Contra. But now we're talking about Operation Cassandra out of the port of Baltimore and Hezbollah. We've talked about the Hezbollah connections to these people in Congress as a way of getting them weapons through the port of Baltimore, through Nancy Pelosi, through Imran Awanigan, through a guy named Al-Attar, who's connected to Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is then funded through the Islamic State of Iran. So we followed these connections, and we've repeated these things over and over again for 4 years. And a lot of folks, especially CNN, want to dismiss this as conspiracy theory, because up until that point, they hadn't activated this in the United States. But you have people like Sibel Edmonds now calling this Gladio C, just like we called it 3 years ago. So it's interesting that things have come full circle with Sibel, which I couldn't have a better ally as far as someone who was in the Washington field office here and knows that is the code name. And again, we've looked at Andrew McCabe and his critical role inside the Washington field office, the surveillance, the leaks, the counterintelligence team that came from the Defense Threat Reduction Agency as a backdoor into the FBI, Peter Strzok, Pyenka. Talked about David Brock's organization with Act Blue. We went and visited the actual front companies like Comet Pizza, which was trying to push this Pizzagate thing. When I met James Alefantis, I immediately said, this is just a CIA front for gun running. The kid thing is a diversion. So I think we've been right pretty much for 4 years. And we're going to continue looking at things like the Unconventional Warfare Manual. I'm going to have an upcoming conversation with Farmer Jones, Alex, the constitutional lawyer. We're going to be looking at this manual. He's sourced of 2016. It's only 44 pages, but it's going to go through some of these things where you put in a shadow government of, let's say, soy kids, and they all seem pretty much believing what they think, and then you send in a group to supplant them. This is from our discussions that you can already see with Alex and myself and a special ops expert, Jeffrey Prather. Then once the soy boys, if you will, get a loose foothold in a city, then you send in your toughs, your operatives, your hardcore operatives that are armed. We don't know if that's going to be Hell's Angels or not. We don't know if it's going to be the Mongols or a Hispanic bike gang, etc. We have heard rumors about Hell's Angels being sent there, but we know Hell's Angels, for instance, just take one of the motorcycle gangs. We know that this has a long history as a cover organization, at least for part of it, for DEA agents, ATF agents, to FBI, etc., to run drugs for weapons campaigns like Fast and Furious, like Operation Cassandra. We've talked about San Bernardino being a key hub for at least 3 major drug motorcycle gangs. You may remember Tafshin Malik, the Pakistani weight and balance expert, who also took a lot of drug making classes in school and was a pre-med or a biologist making drugs there. It's a key point for West Coast drug distribution. That's why you're going to have the footprint cities. Remember, we're trying to undermine Trump in as many different cities as possible. Same place where you have sanctuary cities. The next place is probably going to be Portland. Next place after that, on this drug route, this key I-5 drug route, Seattle being at the top of the drug route, Portland will be next. Then you're going to have potentially Eugene. Then you're going to have San Francisco. Then you're going to have Los Angeles, and maybe even get down into San Diego as far as the West Coast, and then start moving east along the drug routes. That's the key, along that key I-5 corridor, which is the Hells Angels drug route. Why do we know it's going to be Hells Angels? Well, it's been Hells Angels for almost 50 years or 60 years with the CIA, using Indian reservations mostly as a place for sanctuary, a place for drug running. We talked about the Penal reservation that on the Arizona border that Jeffrey Prather is very familiar with, and actually looks at it from the place he does his training classes as a key transit point for evergreen aviation, a key Jeff Epstein drugs for weapons airline. So we've been looking at this for 4 years. We have over 4,000 videos of research. Each one of those videos is hundreds of hours of research that we keep culling, keep synthesizing to ring the bell, to sound the alert, to send out the call that this is what is coming. A Gladio C is what is coming. Sibel Edmonds is correct. Gladio C is happening. It's going to be a combination of bioweapons, as much bioweapon as you can use as possible, along with probably conventional weapons, along with probably explosives, along with probably other forms of irregular warfare. But by studying the manual that they're actually going to use to affect this, by studying the network that actually puts this together and the communications they use, the green zone phones potentially will supplant the BlackBerries for Android. Stealth Genie will probably supplant the BlackBerries for iPhones and iPads. Those are small tweaks. The key here is, how is covert warfare done? How did the DHS? Remember, the son of David Grange, who did Libya, is in charge of continuity of government. How does continuity of government actually work and fire these triggers? How will continuity of government allow this cabal to communicate sort of pseudo-legally without the knowledge of the key people that are advising Trump? These are all the key things that we've been focusing on for 4 years. We're going to keep drilling down, keep getting a more refined view of what's happening to bring you the most important information, and more importantly, to bring the White House the most important information about how to defeat the coup. The coup is coming. I don't think anyone doubts that now. I think everyone understands it's going to be a second wave of COVID, a bioweapon attack to neutralize the population. But then there is also going to be this violent, armed opposition as well to gain these footholds and to challenge Trump. Remember, Trump can't send in federal troops according to the Constitution with posse comitatus. So a governor is the only one who can do that, to send in the National Guard from their state, which has been used for years for supplying these covert operations. Hence the reason they are going to let this fester. They're going to let America go on fire until the election in order to overthrow Trump. And in states like Washington, you can already see this partnership between the Governor Inslee not doing anything about the takeover of this group in Seattle. And I do predict that this group in Seattle, the soy boys, let's call them, will be supplanted by a much more radical and armed group. And as Jeffrey Prather says, in these shadow governments, when the new, really heavily armed shadow government comes in, the soy boys are discarded, if not, in some cases, very seriously hurt or worse, killed, if they offer any resistance to the replacements that are coming in. That's the next thing to look for in these places. Again, look for the I-5 corridor, look for these drug route corridors, these heavy liberal areas along that key Hells Angels heartline, rat line of I-5. So that's all for this morning. I'm going to be following this conversation up later this afternoon with a conversation with Alex Farmer Jones, as you know him on YouTube and the YouTube channel.